My name is Angel Otero. I'm an artist, and we are right now in my studio in Bushwick, Brooklyn. I am from the island of Puerto Rico. I'm from a town called Bayamon, which is on the north side of the island. I was born and raised there, mostly with my grandmother. Growing up in a working class family that is constantly telling you that success is you finding a job that can economically make you live at least quite stable. Trying to be an artist was something that you needed to take as a hobby, something that you do on the side of your serious job. You're not gonna make money, you're gonna starve to death, right? After I finished high school, I applied to 2 different departments in the University of Puerto Rico. I applied for what my family was encouraging me to be an architect, but they had an art department, a painting department, and I applied for that too as a second option. Obviously, I didn't enter the architecture department, I entered the art department, and I studied there for like around 5 years, but when it came to painting classes and other things, I was definitely very interested in. The response of my professors was great. I painted landscapes, I painted portraits, and the usual things that I grew up with around. But I think most of my interest was about how to construct a painting rather than what I could paint. I knew this was the thing that really attracted me the most, but I didn't know it was something I was able to take as serious as I have it now. Later, as I grew up, I started really thinking the idea like, hey, why these artists that are on these books that seem to be in New York and London and established artists that live off what they do, why I cannot be one of those? Those kind of questions were constantly haunting me. And I started not doing so well with my grades on these other fields. And plus my dad encouraged me that I needed to find more of a serious job and find more of established income that I could bring on. So I dropped out of college. And on my day of my birthday, actually, I took my test to become an insurance agent. And I became an insurance agent the day of my birthday, 21. And that day, my father very proud of me, right? Because I'm gonna follow his steps. And the interesting part of that time was that apparently a professor back then in the university, who was never my professor, but was always following what I was doing and asking me things and having conversations with me. Apparently he was an alumni of the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. So he calls the School of the Art Institute in Chicago and asked in admission that he wanted the admission department to send me a letter to ask to see my portfolio. They offered me half a scholarship if I wanted to finish my degree, my undergrad degree in painting in Chicago. I dropped this insurance thing, and at the age of 23, I departed from Puerto Rico to go to Chicago to finish my studies in art at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And they ended up giving me a full scholarship, which I ended up accepting and staying in Chicago for my MFA as well. I arrived thinking that I was a good painter. I was painting abstraction, very gestural, very abstract expressionist type, so very kind of the New York school, what they call. And then eventually when those moments of criticism came from professor students, they were all like, yeah, it's a very cool painting, but it feels like you're standing in the 1950s. I don't see any sort of like unique language here. And that was pretty harsh for me. I didn't know that I needed to verbalize what I was painting. I didn't know that I needed to justify with words what I make, because it was abstract. I thought it was about emotion and the gesture and the physicality of it. And so when I was standing with the professors and they will be, what is this about? I'm like, well, I'm from Puerto Rico and the Caribbean, the sun, and the colors out there. I love colors. I didn't know what else to say about. And they will, they'll be like, yeah, I don't know, I don't see nothing here. And that put me in a very frustrating position because then I had to sit down, and what I didn't know I was supposed to, I needed to think, what can I paint that has never painted before? Having that problem in the back of your head and standing in your studio in front of a white canvas was really intimidating. I had a moment of a very unique visit by an artist named Adam Scott. And it was my first studio visit with my first advisor. And he enters the studio and he starts saying like, oh, these are amazing. Oh my God, these are so beautiful. And I'm like, wow, thank you. He's like, no, really, these, oh my God, these will sell in no time in the gallery. I'm like, oh, great, thanks. Yeah, they have no problem, man. I'm on a vacation. Oh, I'm in Hawaii. And I'm like, this guy's being sarcastic. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I feel like you're speaking to me a little sarcastic. I'm not sure. And he's like, no, I'm actually telling the truth. They don't have a problem. So I think they are lacking problem, and that's boring. I feel good art should have a discussion, should have a problem. And I feel like you're standing in a comfortable zone because you know you're gonna make very beautiful looking paintings, and you're staying yourself in that comfortable zone. So it's up to you. You can put this in a gallery and sell them, or you can put yourself in an uncomfortable zone and see what's up. But then I said, okay, when it comes to content, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna write memories. I'm gonna write a lot of memories about me growing up in Puerto Rico with my grandma, and about all these awkward situations that my grandma had about the house. Elements like the gates of the house, elements like the porcelains that she collected, the table being always really messy and weird, flowers pretty much dead, wind chimes, puzzles, playing bingo with her, the type of refrigerator, the type of tile, all these things I kind of wrote about. And I decided I wanted to reinterpret some of these memories in painting using unconventional materials. And that kind of hit it, right? I started making a body of work that felt very mine, not just the content, but also the form. And I followed that track. I had this pile of dry oil paint in my palette in the studio, and I thought like, oh, I can use this dry paint and collage it with hot glue gun and make the compositions that are still gonna read like oil paint on canvas, but using dry paint. Eventually I ran out from that material, and I decided I wanted to paint little glasses with color, with oil paint, and scrape the oil so I can create more works. That's when I came about this idea of making paintings on Plexiglas and then covering it and then scraping the paint off the glass and collaging that painting eventually on canvas. I tend to reinterpret certain versions of certain paintings by certain periods of the painting history, and I will reinterpret those on the Plexiglas. Let's say a de Kooning painting. I can reinterpret, not appropriateness per se, reinterpreting a de Kooning painting, and eventually when that painting dries on top of the de Kooning, I will reinterpret type of Stuart Davis, more geometric painting. And then I will reinterpret another thing. So they are all references painting on top of each other on the same surface. And later on, when I feel like all these layers are accumulated at a certain amount, then I start the process of scraping all this in one piece. And what it does, it reveals a very unique abstraction that echoes all these references that I mentioned. The works behind me are an accumulation of works that I considered to be unsuccessful after I scraped. I never collaged them. So I accumulated them for a long time in the studio until I felt at some moment this sort of like boring moment or muted moment, systematic. I was feeling not challenged enough. And I decided I was kind of tired of the limitations of the square. I was tired of the collaging. I was tired of the scraping. And I wanted to try something a little more sculptural and out of those boundaries. So I decided to bring out all those unsuccessful paintings and started cutting them in parts and making compositions on the floor. And I wanted to make paintings that were more sculptural and definitely breaking apart the shape of the square of the canvas. The title of that show was called Milagros. Milagros translates to miracles, right, in English. The way I used it was not miracles in the sense of how we know what miracles kind of mean, but milagros is what they call these small charms that back in Puerto Rico and in a lot of places in Latin America, they collect over religious figurines. So when I was making these works, I started finding parallels with that, right, in some way, because I was accumulating all these small amounts of things all together to recreate this painting and form. And so I titled the show because of that. And then before the show, I would say a month before the show, I had this sort of like intuition or impulsive moment where I thought that these negative spaces that I left in the paintings could carry this very literal objects. So I started adding some of these literal objects embedded in the painting in ways that wouldn't take away the conversations about painting in the work. Has come to me that it's been very confusing growing up in an island that is a colony that, you know, we belong to the United States, but we cannot vote for the president, for example. And all these sort of like economical okay but not okay things, that confusion creates a very sort of like unstable mentality, even at a younger age. You know, these are things that I'm not good at speaking about, but I can feel them, right? And I have always kind of used art as a way to, not necessarily to express those things literally, but to try to make the best out of it through art. I don't think I have that specific mission. It has always been kind of like a constant self-discovering. And eventually I put them out there and I see how the world responds to it without a specific expectation. It's even a question that I'm constantly asking myself. Like, what is it that it means to make art? Am I sending a message? Am I doing something for my own sake? All these things take place, and sometimes I don't have the right answer to it. But I've learned to live with the questions, exactly.